Hi, everyone. This is Jennifer Bagnaschi with Deep Believer. Thank you so much for joining us again. Today, our guest, I'm really excited about this because the last time he was on, he shared with us what was discovered at Noah's Ark. He lives at the base of Noah's Ark and he showed us what is inside. It was just mind blowing. So, if you haven't seen that episode, please go back and watch it. But this episode, he is a biblical researcher, loves archaeology. He actually shares with us the route that they believe the Hebrews walked when they went to the Red Sea, what they found in the Red Sea, as well as Mount Sinai. Your jaw may just drop because a lot of these things have not been heard of, but yet he's going to share with us today. Andrew Jones, thank you so much for joining us again on Deep Believer.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to sharing these amazing discoveries that have been in the news here and there. There's some films made about it. But yeah, you're right. A lot of people don't realize how these evidences point to the historical, reliability of the Old Testament, of the whole Bible. And so I love sharing what Ron Wyatt and other researchers have found out in the field and our documentation of these sites. I'm looking forward to our discussion today.
All right. So you were dear friends with Ron Wyatt, and he shared some things with you. Now you
Well, I
go
was
on.
a kid. Yeah,
Oh,
I was just
okay.
yeah, I looked up to him. Well, I was a kid in middle school, and I first heard about him because he came out to California and gave a lecture at my church. And it's from there, before even before he did that, I was talking to him on the phone, just calling him up and doing these 1 to 2 hour like question and answer sessions with him. And this was before the internet and before YouTube. So I was just writing down notes. It was all for personal, as a child, it's a 14-year-old or so. I started doing this research. I was interested in archaeology. And Ron had made all these claims about what he had found from the real locations for different sites, whether it's Noah's Ark or Mount Sinai. And so I had all these questions. And so I talked to him a lot on the phone until he passed away in 1999. And I remember, though, those early years, my parents, especially after that first phone call, you get the bill, at the end of the month or whatever, the first of the next month, and they're like, "Who are you calling in Tennessee?" And we lived in California, and I had, a couple days in a row, I would call him for 2 or 3 hours and ask him all these questions. And then later, they're like, "Okay, you need to limit your time on the phone." But those were the days where I remember you're not just sucked into watching YouTube videos. You're actually reading books. And for me, I was a geek, and I loved this type of research. Understanding the Bible, I really believed these were real events. And so when I heard what Ron, said he had discovered, that really intrigued me, and I had to do the research. And then later, when I had the money, I was able to go out there and see these sites myself.
So it's good that you actually, like you said, did your own research on what he found to see it for yourself. So have you discovered, because we're going to talk about the Red Sea today and Mount Sinai and the pathway that the Israelites walked when they walked through. Um, did you find extra things that Ron Wyatt spoke about?
Yeah, so Ron, his big, you can say, claim to fame, besides Noah's Ark, was proposing that he had found the real Red Sea crossing. That was one of the first things he was working on after Noah's Ark. This was the late 70s. I was just a baby back then, but so I heard about it, 10, 15 years later. But his research, his like original research was that the Red Sea crossing happened at a place called Nuweiba, and we'll show some pictures of that site today. And this site is along the Gulf of Aqaba, so it's a totally a different location than the traditional sites being proposed right near Egypt and the lakes in the Suez Gulf. This was the other Gulf for the Red Sea. And he said, this is the real Red Sea crossing. And then later he was able to go investigate a mountain that he claimed it has to be Mount Sinai. And he found all this evidence there. But all his evidence was, especially for Saudi Arabia, it was confiscated by the Saudi government. And it wasn't until the 1990s that Jim and Penny Caldwell were able to go there. They lived there. They were Americans in the oil industry, and they were able to document these sites because they lived there. They were able to drive every weekend and on their vacation. They drove the Exodus route, investigating where the route was. They took all these pictures, 35 millimeter film, and I don't know what it was, high eight or what type of video format, but it was It wasn't like you have today, where we have the 4K and the drones and everything. And so when I was able to get in there, and which I can tell that story later. A friend of mine got myself and others. We had like 10 people on that first trip in 2016. Back then, Saudi Arabia was closed to tourism. You had to get a special visa if you wanted to go in. And so we were able to get in because he knew of a Saudi prince who gave us the invite. And when we got in there, I brought in a photographer with me, and then we later brought in drones. So we were I'm not bragging here, but we were able to get the first drone videos of these sites where in the past you had kind of a blurry photograph or not attacking the Caldwell's photographs because they're awesome, but now you have crystal clear 4K photos and videos, aerial videos of the Split Rock of Horeb, the top of Mount Sinai, all these sites that Ron talked about and said he saw in the 80s on his two trips there, but he had no photographic evidence. And so we were able to document those and do more exploration. So we, going back and forth, hundreds, not hundreds of times. I mean, I think I've been into Saudi now, total up till a couple of years ago, let's say almost maybe a little over 30 times, in and out on my own, and now we do offer tours too, but doing the research, and this type of access during the 80s and 90s up until 2019 was very limited. It was very difficult to do. And Ron, he went there twice. Both times got all his data. You can say his film cartridges, his video tapes, all confiscated. And they even told him and David Fazal, "Don't talk about what you saw here." So that was in 1985. So, and then when the Caldwells went there in the 90s, there were about 10 years in Saudi Arabia investigating what Ron had found. They had the same issue where they had to sneak around because it was illegal for Westerners to go check out these sites. So now it's a lot easier. You can just get an online visa and you can go rent a not a truck, but a 4x4, and just go out there in the desert like we did. And so, all of this, again, what got me interested was that matched perfectly with the Bible. And as a kid, I'm still very logical today. Like if the Bible says this, and then that means like the Bible says the Israelites went from this site to another site. How do they get between those two sites? Where do they walk? Ron proposed a route, and I wanted to go see that myself to see if it made sense. And that's what I've been doing now that I do this full time. So it's a really enjoyable job. I love it.
So, what do you mean by saying Ron Wyatt found the real, or he believes he found the real Red Sea crossing? And
Yeah.
why do other archaeologists believe it's elsewhere?
Well, so I don't know if they can the people can see what's behind me on this TV screen. This is an example of a map you'll find in the back of your Bible or in about a Bible atlas or Bible dictionary. And what it shows is all the proposed Red Sea crossings, the Exodus route, and that's exactly the reason why there are many ideas out there is because people don't really know, and it takes someone on the ground investigating, interpreting the Bible text, trying to find archaeological evidence or geographical evidence to match up with the Bible. And a lot of people get blinded by one view, like a traditional view, and they'll just try to find the evidence to support where tradition said the Red Sea crossing happened. And a lot of these traditional views are much later, way after the actual events, and so the sites have been lost. So it doesn't mean that it can't be figured out. It just means it's much more difficult. And so if you were to just come with an open mind and start looking at this, you would realize that the traditional sites being proposed don't match what the Bible says, the text. And so a lot of archaeologists, they either, if they're not Christian, they don't even believe the Exodus happened because it's one big miracle. Um, or if they are Christian, they're willing to, whether they don't want to put the time into it or they're willing to change the story here and there, like say, well, it was a much smaller number of people that walked, and so they can easily go this way. The Bible says 600,000 men. And so if you look at that, there'll be, over 1 million to 2 million people with the children and, women and children. Then you had the mixed multitude that followed along. So, archaeologists today, they're more skeptical and they're looking at it in the view of today's world, I think. So they don't realize, well, how can 1 and 2 million people walk this way? So then they make it smaller. So maybe it's only 10,000 people or 5,000. Um, and so you have a lot of theories of the route being something a small scale. The Exodus route happening in a lake, like the Red Sea crossing. And the route through the Red Sea was very close to Goshen in Egypt. So they don't have to walk that far. There was no, miracle really involved in this. And that's what you find proposed in a lot of the back of your Bibles and these maps. And here's one map here that this is the way the Israelites went. And then, of course, for the location of Mount Sinai, it's the same thing. Once if you decide that the traditional Mount Sinai in the southern Sinai Peninsula down here, or even somewhere else in the peninsula, is where Mount Sinai is, then you're not going to even consider the Gulf of Aqaba as the Red Sea crossing because you're going to look for the Red Sea close to Goshen because obviously after they crossed the Red Sea, they got to Mount Sinai. So that just rules out the Gulf of Aqaba. So Ron's proposal, when he was looking for a beach, a location on the Gulf of Aqaba that would fit 1 or 2 million people plus the Egyptian army, he only found one location. And then he went over there and started investigating it. Then he started saying, "Hey, this matches everything. There's mountains around. There's a walkable path under the water, and we'll talk more later about some of the other things he found there. But this idea that it was in the Gulf of Aqaba was very unique. Not a lot of people had considered that, and so when he proposed it, that got a lot of people's attention. But again, yeah, you're not gonna, he wasn't a professional archaeologist, so and the archaeological community a lot of them rejected that idea. Today, there are more and more who believe Sinai's in Arabia and Saudi Arabia and the land of Midian, like he was proposing. And more are looking at the Nuweiba, which is right in the middle of the Gulf of Aqaba, that town of Nuweiba there with the big beach. They're looking at that as the real Red Sea crossing. Thanks for Ron, doing the original research and getting it out there in his old videos and church meetings and TV interviews. He got the information out there, and so now you have a lot. He's passed away, but you still have a lot of people interested in these discoveries because it makes sense. It fits perfectly what the Bible says, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But and so that's why today you will still find people saying, "Well, no, the Exodus route happened here, and this is where the Red Sea crossing was actually a little lake right here, or this lake right there." Um, and because Ron was not a professional archaeologist, they totally ignore his proposal that the Red Sea crossing was a little further away and in a different gulf. It wasn't the Gulf of Suez or the lakes; it was the Gulf of Aqaba, still part of the Red Sea. So
And that is really interesting because, like we were discussing before we went on air, archaeologists hated Ron Wyatt. And one of the main reasons was because he didn't have a degree. So he wasn't an official archaeologist. So they didn't take what he says seriously. But like you were mentioning, how Ron said, well, this actually makes sense. This route makes sense because it actually lines up exactly what the Bible says and how God literally showed him where to go. And he followed the steps of God and it confirmed everything, which is really interesting. So before we get to all that, I want to go in chronological order and let's talk about
sure.
the Israelites. All right. So God frees them from slavery from the Egyptians and they start walking. What did you guys find?
Yeah, so this is really interesting. When you look at the Exodus account in chapter 13 and 14, specifically, when they leave Egypt, God said, "You're going to go day and night." And that's why he provided them a pillar of cloud by day, this huge, giant, shaded pillar that, made up of the clouds that could shade them from the sun. Because they're going through this wilderness desert landscape. And he also gave it turned to a pillar of fire at night. And as it says in Nehemiah, it showed them where to go. So like a giant flashlight, torch. And this then enabled them to go a lot longer distances each day. But it also shows that the Red Sea crossing was not just next door to Goshen. In fact, when they get to the Red Sea crossing, they leave on Passover. You're doing chronological order. First of the month, middle, the 15th day, the middle, which is the middle of the month, they leave Egypt. The 10th plague happens. The firstborn is, our Pharaoh says, "Okay, you can go. You can go worship God. You can just leave Egypt. You can take everything you own. You can take your children. You can take your wives. You can take your goods." And then even God tells the Israelites, or Moses tells them, like, get payment for all that slavery. And so they take the gold and all this treasure out of Egypt. They pillaged the country almost, and the Egyptians, they were just devastated. The plagues had ruined their economy, had showed that their gods were false. It had off not just the firstborn people, but the firstborn of the cattle. You had dead frogs laying around. It was just like a toxic environment now, and the superpower was brought to its knees. And so they just want Israel to leave. It's like, okay, the Israelites, the Hebrews, get out of our country. We don't want you here. And so it was they were kicked out. And one day they left their homes a little after midnight, I think it was, early morning. They were in Goshen, which is this area, the eastern area of the Nile Delta, very fertile land. When we go there on our tours, or if you go there on your own, you'll see it's just a lot of farmland. Even though right outside of it, dusty, sandy, hot desert, right near the Nile River, you have this fertile environment where a lot of farming going along. You have cattle and sheep, and Joseph was able to get that land for his father Jacob hundreds of years before the Exodus happened, and that is where they settled it, and they multiplied and grew until they became a great nation. And so by the time of the Exodus, they're filling up that eastern Nile Delta area, and then when Pharaoh kicks them out, they had to leave fast, and that's why the Bible says that God told them, you need to bake bread of, they call it the bread of haste, because you're leaving quickly. You don't have time, and this is flat bread. So you don't have time for even the bread to raise, have yeast in it. They carried the dough with them, it says in Exodus, from their home. So it's not even baked yet. And then at their first encampment called Sukkot, was on the very edge of you can say, the land of Egypt. They had it was a fort there. It was a fortress. It was an entry exit point into the country from the Sinai Peninsula, and this was one of the routes out of Egypt. And on those, they found, for example, archaeological evidence that at these forts, hundreds of ovens. And so it's easy for the Israelites at this place to get organized, bake the bread for their journey. And this was their first camping site. But then the Bible says when they left there, they went day and night. And that's where those who are trying to say that the Exodus happened very close to Goshen, that's where there's a problem, because you can't. They want to say on the third night Israel was at the Red Sea crossing. Well, how can you go day and night if your first night you're here? It doesn't give you much time to, if you're going to spend day and night going to wherever you want to propose the Red Sea crossing is. And but Ron proposed that they took the ancient trade route, which later became the Muslim Hajj route to Mecca, the land route from Egypt across this peninsula called Sinai. Today it's called the Sinai Peninsula. Back then, it was given another name. But this was all wilderness. This was considered foreign land outside of the Nile Delta, the lush green area. So for the Egyptians and the people living there, like the Israelites, you're going into an area that is very hostile. Um, but yet God provided them with the cloud by day to give them shade, and the pillar of fire at night to keep them warm at their encampments and give them a light to where to go. So they're following the route. They don't, they don't have Google Maps back then, no GPS on their iPhones, and so they're going across this desert. And so the only route then that they could have taken that would get them to where Mount Sinai was in the land of Midian was this trade route across the Sinai Peninsula. And now the Egyptian government just recently reopened that route for foreigners to drive. The Egyptians could have driven, they've always been able to drive. It's a two-lane highway, a lot of places, or 4 lanes. So just last year they opened it. It was closed for over 10 years. So I was able finally to drive the route. And you just see this flat area. Critics have, before I even drove that route, I remember I was dealing with some Facebook debates where those who say, Mount Sinai was in the traditional site, and that's all tradition. And they were claiming that, oh, the Israelites cannot walk there because they said, oh, there's this sharp rocks. Pharaoh's chariots couldn't follow them. It's a very bad place to go. And so we're now driving on this open route, my friend and I. And last year we did this, and we're driving along, and we stop and we look out there, and it's hard soil, it's sandy in places, but chariots could easily go there. In fact, and my friend Francois, we were doing a film trip last December, 2024, and I was telling him this whole idea where, look, the Israelites could easily walk here with their sheep and goats. I don't care what the critics say. You can physically go out there and look yourself as a person and use logic, look at it. And we did that. So we stopped at one place, and we get out and he said, Andrew, I want to film you here explaining, this whole thing about how this is a walkable route across the Sinai Peninsula. So I get out and he starts filming me, and then suddenly behind me, this Bedouin woman appears. I mean, she like magically appears, but no, she came over the hilltop with her sheep. And she's literally what doing what we're talking about, walking the route of the Exodus with sheep, like the Israelites would have. And it was like perfect timing. God had set up the scene. And so then my friend is, okay, let's stop interviewing you, Andrew. I'm going to go video this lady. Thankfully, it was okay with us videoing it. And just showing, here's a live modern example of someone out there living, the Bedouin lifestyle, their culture, and they have sheep and goats, and they're out there walking this route that people were saying, "Oh no, you couldn't do that." Now you can see. And so, anyways, this is what Ron Wyatt did. He was very logical. He went out there, investigated. So we're on the Gulf of Aqaba. That was his first thing he was looking for. He said, "Okay, I don't." He said the Bible account doesn't make sense for the Israelites to leave Goshen and then a couple days later cross the Red Sea. And then here's the key verse. For those who have a Bible, you can look this up. When they're at the Red Sea crossing in Exodus chapter 14, it says that the Israelites complained to Moses, said, "You took us out of Egypt into the wilderness to die." And they mention that over and over, that they're outside of Egypt. They're in the wilderness. Now, if you look at the proposed Red Sea crossing sites, most of them would be considered by the ancient Egyptians and the Israelites inside Egypt, on this eastern side of the ancient, boundary of Egypt itself. This area that has the lush, greenery and farmland, the Nile Delta, that was all very close to Goshen, and that was all considered part of Egypt. They're not in the wilderness yet until you exit out and get into this vast, wasteland. And so now the Bible story makes sense. When they say, "Why did you take us out of Egypt?" When they're complaining to Moses at the crossing, now that makes perfect sense for the site that Ron Wyatt found, on Nueva down here, it's actually on the map. These other sites didn't make sense. And so the whole, the pieces start coming together, and that's what Ron was doing. He was trying to figure it out. He goes there. In fact, he found it by an airplane. He was flying an airplane up and down the Gulf. He had rented one from a lot. And at this time, the late 70s, the Sinai Peninsula was controlled by the Israeli army, as part of Israel. And so he was able to do that, fly a plane from a lot in Israel at the tip and fly it down, following the coastline. And he was watching out the window. And some of the YouTube videos out there has his original footage, showing different clips. And then he spots Nueva. So now it's very easy. We have Google Earth, Google Maps, and you can easily go over there yourself. But it's a little more difficult in the late 70s. And Ron sees this huge beach, and he knows, like, okay, this is matching what the historians, ancient historians wrote about. But he wanted to go on the ground. So once he spotted the area, he goes out there with his sons in the late 70s, and they start scuba diving. And they start looking for evidence. And so that's, and this is the type of, even though he wasn't a professional archaeologist, for him, this is a logical location. It has a large beach. You're surrounded by mountains. You're lost in the wilderness out here. You're outside of Egypt. So things start matching up. And it's the only site up and down the Gulf of Aqaba that matches the Bible account perfectly. And so not even talking about the other traditional sites, which people just, they just put a pin on a map and say, okay, maybe this is the Red Sea crossing. And so now you have like 4 or 5 examples of these proposed sites. And I can show you a couple satellite images here, or these are actually space shuttle photography. This is an example of one site that is on, this is the Mediterranean Sea, and this is the start of the Suez Canal. But in this general area is one of the most popular proposed Red Sea crossing sites today. In the scholarly world, if you believe in the Red Sea, you'll see a lot of Bible maps has up over here, and down here would be the land of Goshen. So it's just very close. It's very flat. How can you tell? How could Pharaoh think, "Wow, they're caught, they're lost in the wilderness area"? How can Josephus, who lived during the time of Christ, so he's 1,500 years after the Exodus, but he's much closer to the events than we are today. Now he wrote that at the Red Sea crossing there were mountains that blocked in the Israelites. So they were stuck there on a on the beach in front of the Red Sea. There's no mountains here. So this is a flat area. There's no reason for the Israelites to complain and be scared. If there's a little lake in front of them, a little pond, they can just walk around it and keep going. Why would they feel fearful and tell Moses, "Oh, you're going to kill us out here"? So if Pharaoh's coming in behind them, they just go around the little lake and keep going. So that's one site. Here's another site. And this is, let's see if I remember correctly. This is the Bitter Lakes, I believe. Yeah, let me just check one more site here. I need to do this overall photograph. So this is the site we just saw a close up of. The next one I've shown you really briefly is called the Bitter Lakes. And this water, this basin that's there, again, it's a lake. And we have hotels there we've stayed at on our tours, and you can drive around this lake. So if the Israelites are coming to this lake and people say, "This is the Red Sea crossing," why are they scared there? They're not even stuck. So then this is like a logical thing. You're just on the ground looking, comparing it to the Bible. It just, if Pharaoh's coming in behind them from ancient Egypt, and this is the border of ancient Egypt, and this is the wilderness out there, then all the Israelites have to do is walk around the lake and keep going. There's no way for them to be stuck or concerned about being caught in this wilderness environment when you're on this side. And that has to do with the other locations. This is Lake Timsah by the modern day city of Ismailia. This is the Suez Canal. So this is the modern canal that they built for the shipping. But it basically follows the boundary of ancient Egypt. So anything on this side was considered part of Egypt. And now there's more, they had more green land back then. But on the other side, you're outside of Egypt. And so they gave the place names outside of Egypt. They had a special symbol, and it was basically a symbol for foreign land. And so when you see the hieroglyphs for like a name, like a fortress or something, if they consider that part of Egypt, it wouldn't have this symbol, which I believe is, and most of the time it's like three mountains, which kind of gives you the idea that you're outside of the land of Egypt. And the Israelites, none of these sites here, they would consider themselves outside of Egypt. It's not until you get to where Ron Wyatt was looking at, and go back to that map, where you have the Sinai Peninsula and you're on the other part of the Red Sea, this whole area is considered outside of Egypt. And so, there's a little details a lot of people ignore. Like when the Israelites say that to Moses, "You took us outside of Egypt, and that we're now in the wilderness. We're going to die out here. Pharaoh's coming in." There's only a couple spots that will match what the Israelites said. And that is any site that's considered on the, especially the Gulf of Aqaba, on the western shores of it. And so that's one example of just going on the ground, investigating it, and not being blinded by tradition to, just open-minded, say, okay, what fits the biblical record? And then the extra bonus is, even fits the book of the historical books that Josephus wrote about the history of the Jews. He writes in their descriptions about the Red Sea crossing, and it maps perfectly to the site that Ron had proposed back in the 70s.
You know what, Andrew? This is actually really, really good because as you're speaking, I'm envisioning it, and there would have been no need for a miracle to happen. There would be no need for God to part the Red Sea because you said
Hmm.
they could have just walked around the lake. And like you said, they were in a spot between, impossible and impossible. So God had to make it possible.
Yes, exactly. And so those who, I think we even talked about this a little bit before we started the show, was that um, that there are a lot of the scholars who are proposing a site for the Red Sea along this, I put a dotted line there, like this boundary that's very close to Goshen over here in the Nile Delta. It's the Exodus to them is a story where everything happens near Goshen. There's really no miracle involved. You don't need to be stuck at any body of water when you can keep on walking. And so it basically lessens the impact. And you're like, well, why did they go this way? In fact, this is a key point I want to bring out that I skipped over. Um, and that was, let's see if I have it in here. That's an animation? Yeah. So this green arrow here, if you read and then the blue, okay, I have this animation on my slides, but the green, this is the main route to the Promised Land. It followed the coast. It was called in Greek, or I think it's Greek, Via Maris, or maybe that's Latin. but it was the way of the sea. The ancient Egyptians, their name for this road to Canaan was the way of Horus, and that was one of their gods. Um, in the Bible, Moses calls it, and God talking to Moses, he calls it the way of the Philistines. So it's kind of like the name is like the end name is used for the road. So the way to the Philistines, the way of the Philistines. And so God says, don't go that route because they had a whole bunch of Egyptian fortresses along here. It's well established. And you're going to end up right away meeting the Philistines, who were probably not very friendly to the Israelites. So God even mentioned that. He said the Israelites might get disheartened, might get attacked, and then go back to Egypt. And so God took them a different way, and the Bible calls that route the way of the wilderness of the Red Sea. So it's another route, not this main highway out, you can call it. And that way went through the Sinai Peninsula. That's that trade route that went to ancient Arabia. It was well marked in ancient times, and later it becomes the general route becomes the Muslim Hajj route to Mecca. When they were before they brought in the ships to go across the Red Sea, they were just taking the camel and going that way to Mecca, and then it followed the same route. So it's a well-established ancient trade route across the middle of the Sinai Peninsula, and that's the one that just opened again. So you can now drive it. Many places it's a four-lane highway. And my friend there even showed us right near the middle of it this ancient, not ancient, but it's from the Middle Ages. This inscription put up by one of the kings of Egypt from the Middle Ages. So I want to say it's maybe 500, 600 years old. And he was marking. He basically said, there's an explanation there in Arabic that we had it translated with Google Translate, and it was basically saying that this king helped establish the route, like he cleared the way, or he like put in wells for the pilgrims going to Mecca. And so it's his like little advertisement for what he did as a king to help the pilgrimage route. And that is there. So it's a well established, the modern highway goes right beside this ancient inscription from the Middle Ages, Islamic inscription. And so we documented that. But when God tells Moses, don't take this way, take the other one, it gives you the idea, okay, they're not even going up here by the coast, except when you look at the back of your Bibles or in a Bible dictionary or atlas today, most routes, those who are very vocal and attacking the Nueva site, they're proposing a site up here. And then how do they get up there? They're making the Israelites go the way that God told them not to go. And so why are they going up here on this green arrow area and saying, especially this lake here, and saying this is where the Israelites ended up at some little lake? That's their Red Sea crossing. When God told them to go the opposite way, he says, follow, this is the blue line, go out that way. And then it was along that route, day and night they went. And then God tells them change direction and go to the Red Sea. He's going to make an example out of Pharaoh. This again, the traditional view conflicts with what God told Moses to do. And no one seems to mind that. They're just, hey, I have the PhD, I guess. And so I think it happened here, so be it, kind of thing. But when you look at the nitty gritty and logically look at this and you're on the ground exploring, the site that Ron found out there in Nueva, that's perfect sense. It makes perfect sense. And it doesn't have any conflict with the Bible.
So why does it make perfect sense? Were there more mountains? Was there
Yeah.
a
So,
Mhm.
well, let me show you a photo of that site. Here's a close up of, here is where this is the way of the wilderness of the Red Sea. So when God told them, I don't know if it shows up on your screen with the TV glare, but anyways, at the end of this route, when they're going day and night, the next camping site after Sukkot, where they bake the bread we were talking about earlier, was Etham. And it says it was on the edge of the wilderness, like it was on the other edge, the other side of the wilderness. And it's a big flat area. Again, you have to find camping sites where the Israelites, being 1 to 2 million people, with their animals could camp. So it's not just like a little canyon. They have to find a place. And right there is a huge, big area before you get into modern Israel and before you go across. So if they're following this route to Mount Sinai, which we believe is in the land of Midian, you get to a point where you're about to leave the Sinai Peninsula and actually get into Arabia, into the land of Midian. But at that location, that's where God says, change your direction. And it just so happens that at this location, there was one canyon system, one road or route that goes down to the Red Sea. And guess where that ends up at? It ends up at the Nueva Beach, where Ron believed that was the Red Sea crossing. And so here you have the route of the Exodus, and then God telling them, change your direction, go to the Red Sea. Well, how could they do that if there's a whole bunch of mountains there? Well, there's actually a canyon system, one way onto this. And the Israelites followed it. And when you're there, when you're driving through this canyon system, now there's a broken up paved road. So you can drive and explore it. If you know the Bedouins, they can take you up into this canyon system. And it's just, you're just surrounded by high mountains. Here's an example of a photograph of that area. You see you have mountains on either side. You're going down this wadi, this route. This is the paved road today, but you're going down this valley, and you're hemmed in. And that's why God told him to do that, because he said Pharaoh will think you're lost in the wilderness. You're basically hemmed in. You can't go anywhere. You're caught. So Pharaoh thought, oh, I can easily get you guys back because you're stuck there at the Red Sea crossing. Now, at the other places, the other proposed sites, you're not stuck. As we talked earlier, you just walk around the lake or around the marsh. Here, this is why it actually fits the Bible better, because you're actually going off the trade route to Midian, where Mount Sinai is. You're going down this canyon system, and you're hemmed in. You can't really get out of it, and you end up on a beach where there's no way to go. And this is the Nueva Beach, huge area with thousands of acres. And this is where Ron believed the Red Sea crossing happened. And here's another image of that big beach. And we take our groups out there. And when you're there, there's certain locations at the south end and the north end where you kind of get a little elevation, and you can look down and see how big this area is, in person. And so here's a picture of me. I'm standing in this. It's called Wadi Watir, the valley of, and Watir means water. A lot of flash floods happen down here. So, and there's some oases scattered through the canyon system. And right here, I'm basically at the Nueva. There's a huge beach by the Red Sea, looking into the interior of the Sinai Peninsula. So if you take this for many miles, you end up at the Etham encampment and the ancient trade route that goes across the land of the Sinai Peninsula, the way of the wilderness of the Red Sea. And so this is the way the Israelites came down. There's only one way to this beach. But that's just one clue. The other thing I want to point out, because you're asking, why is this better location? And I'm going to go back to this photo, which shows the whole beach. So I was standing right there in that one photo. This is the canyon that takes you in. Today, there's modern roads that they have cut into the mountain that lets you get out of there. But in the past, this was the only way in and out. And when you're here, you're basically caught. And so if Pharaoh's army is coming down the same route behind you, you remember the Ten Commandments movie with Charlton Heston, you have Pharaoh's army, and they look and they see this cloud of dust in the distance, and they realize, like, oh, where we're going to go? Like, the sea's in front of them, the mountains surround them. And so let's talk about these mountains. These mountains block you in. And the Bible doesn't say mountains in it. It just talks about the wilderness. But Josephus, who lived a little after the time of Christ, he was an ancient historian, a Jewish historian, and he wrote that there were mountains blocking the Israelites in at the Red Sea crossing. There are 0 mountains up at most of those traditional sites we looked at. So again, you're looking at all the biblical evidence. You have this site a little further out of Egypt. It's on one of the Red Sea, gulfs, the Gulf of Aqaba, and you have this huge area where they're stuck at. But here's the other key. And I'm going to just jump to another slide, because this illustrates, you can't just be stuck here, because in the biblical account, God parts the water and they walk through. Well, you have to make sure you can walk through here if the water is gone. And if you look at the topography under the water, and I want to give a close up here. This is a bathymetric map, which kind of shows you the topography at this area, the underwater terrain, and it's a walkable path. This area here, this is the Gulf of Aqaba. This is the Nueva Beach this is the west side, and over here is Saudi Arabia. Israel's up here, the Promised Land, and so this canyon, Wadi Watir, they're coming down. They're stuck on the beach. Moses, hits the water. God parts the sea. Well, now where would they go? They walked. They never went down a cliff. But if you were to look at other parts of the Gulf of Aqaba, and here's a good example of comparing the underwater terrain. Only Nueva has this walkable path. It's a gentle slope. It's walkable, so the chariots could go after them. The Israelites and their carts and the children, they could all walk it. Other sites, they have sea cliffs, very steep terrain. Some of them vertical, like here at the Straits of Tiran, which is at the down at the entrance to the Gulf of Aqaba. At these other locations along the Gulf, there's only one site. If you look up and down the whole Gulf of Aqaba, here's a map of the whole Gulf. There's some beaches here. There's a beach here, but how would you get to it? This one is the famous resort, Sharm el Sheikh. This is the entrance. That's the Straits of Tiran. This is the main body of the Gulf. This is the Red Sea below. This is the Sinai Peninsula. This is Saudi Arabia, ancient Midian, where Mount Sinai was. This is Nuweiba right there. And Nuweiba is the only beach area where you can remove the water and the Israelites could walk and not have to scale a cliff or use rappelling to get down. So like everything has to match, and that's the exact location where Ron was at investigating this in the 70s and 80s. And then when you get to the other side, you can't just like walk up and then be confronted by a mountain range, which would be, if they were to cross here, it would be a cliff on this side. But the mountains in Saudi Arabia go right to the water. So thankfully, not only do we have a big beach area on the Nuweiba side, guess what? The Saudi side is a much bigger beach area. Here's a photograph of that. So it perfectly matched. Israelites coming up out of the water. There's a huge beach, to receive them on. Let me show you a photograph. Here's a good one. This is the Saudi side here. It's massive. It just goes and goes up and down the coast there. That's is Nuweiba. You can because my photographer took this up on the hill, looking down towards Egypt, towards the Sinai Peninsula. This is that wadi, that canyon, where they came down and got stuck on this beach here. And then this is about 8 to 9 miles across, depending on how you angle it. And this is the walkable path. This is the Red Sea. So when you split the water and get rid of it, they could easily come across the Gulf there. And that night, when when the one of the biggest miracles in the Bible happened. Here's another photograph of this huge beach on the Saudi side. And then again, it has to match perfectly everything. So the other thing is, how do they get off this beach? We're not talking about the Red Sea or the Exodus route, from the Red Sea to Sinai yet. But to make this the Red Sea crossing, they can't be stuck over on this side. Well, guess what? There are at least two valley systems that lead you off of this into Saudi Arabia, into the land of Midian. And here's another photograph. I think this was a drone photograph I took, looking into one of these valleys, these wadis are called, the dry riverbed, a perfect natural highway that comes off of the Red Sea crossing beach into the land of Midian, leads you to Mount Sinai. So everything about here's a drone photo I took. This is the Saudi side, and you're looking south. So this is basically the Red Sea crossings right here. This is just how massive this beach area is. And so they had plenty of room to get on this side. This is the side where it says after the water collapsed back down and destroyed the chariots and the army, they had Miriam led them in song. This is the big, the celebration. It looks like my camera's automatically moving. Move it back. This is where the Israelites they celebrated. Their enemies are gone. They never had to worry about the Egyptians again. For me, there's nothing that like there's not like one problem with this site. To me, everything matches the biblical account. Let me show you just a couple. Here's a drone photo. You can see how shallow the water is. This light blue. It's very beautiful out there. But you can see here this light blue water just coming out. And this is our ship. We actually flew the drone off of our ship in Saudi Arabia there. Now, sadly, they don't allow you to rent boats anymore. Up to the 2019, we would bring tourists out there actually on the Red Sea crossing. And they say now that they're studying the ecology and, some things like that. So they don't want people scuba diving out there and renting boats. Now, on the Egyptian side, you can scuba dive and rent. But anyways, this shows how it's a gentle underwater slope, the seabed here, and it goes all the way to Nuweiba. That's the Wadi Wachir Canyon, and this is we brought a drone onto this boat. I remember the Saudi Coast Guard searched our bags. Thankfully, they didn't see the drone, and we were able to fly it off the boat and land it back on it. We were doing this investigation. We were using sonar. It was actually a commercial, what you call that commercial, but consumer level fish finder device, but it had sonar, so you could actually map out the bottom of the sea. And so we brought it onto the ship, and we told the captain, since we're paying you for the day, just do what we tell you. So we just like he could go back and forth, and we were just scanning. And so there's certain areas where it's not walkable there. Like you said, okay, that's probably pretty steep. The angle there, 47 degrees. But there are other areas where it's just a gentle rise, and so we were trying to see what was underwater with the sonar device. But the big key thing that got Ron excited, and this is the controversial part of this, is that he claimed he had found the actual chariots from the Red Sea, from the the miracle that happened there when God destroyed the Egyptian army. And so this was one of the photographs that is on the TV here, and I'll give you these slides so you can put them in. Um, but and I'll just move closer so we're still dealing with technology. And so now you can see it a little better. This oval, this round shape, this is a this way. This round shape is a photograph, actually a still of a video, about 80 feet below the water, I believe, right off the beach in Nuweiba on the Egyptian side. Ron took this photograph, this video, in 1988. He was with an artist, a Christian, someone who could draw, and this guy saw it from the water's crystal clear there. So when he was on the ship and Ron was videoing this, he drew out what he saw, and this was his drawing up through all that water, looking down on it. And it was this four spoke round wheel. Now people will say these were wheels, valve, things on a ship. And sadly, this thing is now covered with a lot of sand because there's a current there going over the walkable path, this little sill or hump that's walkable that the Israelites would have taken. So that underwater current moves the sand back and forth. And so what you see one day, you might not find, the next day or two. And so we went there in 2000, my first trip to this location. And this was 1 year after Ron had already passed away. And I remember we had a big team and we spent 3 days looking for chariot wheels and looking for this, especially the gold one that Ron said was laying there that he had documented. You can see it down this area. I don't want to move too much because then the camera moves, but that area right there, we couldn't find it. And so I know I get people contacting me, of course, because we do tours out there, and we let people, if they want to, they have a license. They can either snorkel, you don't need a license, but the scuba dive you do. And so you can rent the scuba tanks there. And the people always ask us, can you take us to where the chariot wheels are? We want to go down and take a picture. I was like, well, I know people who have scuba dived here many, many times, and I'm only Ron and a couple others have seen these rare examples. Now, there's a lot of coral shapes there. So some people say the coral has grown over the wreckage, and then and that preserved the shape. That's again a controversial theory because some people say, well, the chariot wheels are wooden; they would decay pretty fast, and how fast does coral grow? So at any rate, there are some like these where Ron did document. You can see them clearly. Whether they're modern or ancient. Sadly, we can't do our own tests because they're buried in the sand there. So when I'm talking about the Red Sea crossing, this is what Ron, he got him excited. This is what he was doing out there with his sons in the late 70s and 80s. But today, people can scuba dive out there. It's just difficult to find this stuff. Instead, what I focus in on, hey, this path here, the Nuweiba path at the top you see there, that's walkable. The degrees are like when you look at the beach of Nuweiba, when you're looking at here, this map, and you see the Nuweiba beach there, it's giant. Like 1 to 2 million people can go there. When you compare it to the biblical account where it says that they were surrounded, now they're lost in the wilderness, and you compare it to like Josephus, it says they're surrounded by mountains. This is the only spot. I'm trying to get a good photograph of that here. Go back up the screen. Here we go. Again, so this is stuff you can point to that's not archaeological. It's geology and geography. So this is stuff that on a map you can say, hey, this matches the Bible. This is walking distance from Egypt. They're lost in the wilderness at this location. You're surrounded by mountains. You have thousands of acres out here. And without even talking about chariot wheels, you can look at this. So that's like the cherry on the top is the chariot wheels. and that just adds more to it that this is the real location of the Red Sea crossing.
So the chariot wheels were found along that route that
Yeah,
Ron said it
on the
was.
underwater that at this location. And go back to the photograph there, 'cause that's a really special photo. Here we go. There we go. There we go. This one especially. You can see him just again. I gotta move that camera. Sorry. There we go. Based on where my face is. Oh man, technology.
So how old do they say these wheels are?
Well, so this is the interesting part. The first thing that Ron had found in the late 70s, it was not this one. It was the hub, the middle part of the wheel. And he said it was just covered in coral, but there were broken up the spokes, which are the things that come out of the hub to the wheel part. Being very technical here. But anyways, the spoke, that's what he had shown this guy in Egypt who was head of antiquities for the Giza Plateau area. And he was one of the Egyptian officials that he became friends with, and he took out this hub that had eight spokes, like broken up spokes coming out of the middle. It was just a coral shape though, and he took this piece up. You're not supposed to do this, but he did, and he brought it to the guy's office. And the guy immediately, when he saw it, he said, "Oh, this is from the 18th dynasty." And Ron was asking him, so when we talk about the dynasties of Egypt, a lot of conservative biblical scholars believe is the 18th dynasty that the Exodus happened. You're backing up 480 years. It says in First Kings from the time of Solomon's, his reign and the temple being built. It has a time frame given. So and they know exactly when Solomon reigned. So when you back it up, you get to 1446, 45 BC. This is the middle of the 18th dynasty, which was the time when Egypt was a superpower, a great nation. And when the Egyptian officials saw this hub with eight spokes coming out, he immediately said, "Well, this is 18th dynasty." So Ron's like, "How do you know so fast? What, like, how can you date this?" And he said, "Well, it was only during this dynasty that the eight spoke wheels were really used. It was a very short time period. They were you will see in Tutankhamun's tomb, other Egyptian officials' tomb, um, the examples of chariots, and even drawn on the walls of these tombs that you see in these temples, the chariots, and they basically settled on a six spoke wheel. They were so during the 18th dynasty, this time frame that the Bible says the Exodus happened. You have the four spoke, you have a six spoke. I mean, they settle on a six spoke, and you have an eight spoke design for the chariot wheels. They were experimenting. It seems like the six spoke was the most, you can say, stable or best design in the class. And Ron at the Red Sea crossing, he's claiming that he's found not only this four spoke, but that first wheel he found was the eight spoke that he took to the Egyptian official. And then he said there were even other ones that had six spokes coming out. So all three of those type of chariot wheels were only used during the 18th dynasty, and that's the time frame that the Bible says the Exodus happened. Other scholars they try to put it during the 19th dynasty, and then some even before the 18th dynasty. But a lot of conservative biblical scholars will say it was the 18th dynasty, and it so happens that's the time that these three types of wheels were used by the Israelites. I mean, by the Egyptians. So,
So what material? Did they find out what material was this gold?
well, so yeah, we haven't found this one again. That's the problem. But Ron's testimony was that it's so fragile, he left it there. That he said it was just the veneer, the outside of it, the inside had all rotted away. So it's just a very thin shell forming this. And so if you were to try to pick it up, it would just disintegrate. And so he just left it there in place and just took video. Um, but if you look in the Egyptian, like the Cairo Museum and now the Grand Egyptian Museum, where they have Tutankhamun's chariots, and they just opened that big museum a couple months ago, and so I was there in December, and you have all the artifacts found in Tutankhamun's tomb there on display, including I forget how many chariots, but they're all set up. It's a massive museum and amazing. But these chariot wheels, you look at it, and they're all made from wood, different types of wood that they would import in. So very, these are like, expensive vehicles, like Ferraris of the day or something, and the militarized, so they're used for the military too. So these are very special wheeled vehicles that were, designed for war to move fast. And so the chariots were very lightweight. A man or two could pick it up. And the wheels were made mainly of this wood, and then I think they had leather, a very small amount of metal, but there were gilded ones, which means covered with gold. There are those two. They're mainly for the state chariots, not exactly for war, but the pharaoh could ride in it or something. So Ron, he wasn't sure who was in this one. There was no license plate on it, but this was though a very special one that he had discovered. That sadly, we can't verify it or go down there and look at it ourselves. Until hopefully somebody can rediscover it.
Okay, so what do you think? The wheel that's showing on the screen right now, what do you think the material's made out of? Because we know it's not wood because it's shiny.
Yeah, well, Ronta, that was all gold, gilded. This was one of the special chariot wheels that were gilded. Um, if you look at it closely, it has that shine and gleam to it. So unless it's this produced a couple of years ago, this is 1988, then it would suggest that it is a metal that doesn't corrode, which would be like gold. Um, and so this is a perfect example of something that you have the photograph, but you can't do more investigation of it. So it's very hard to know 100% on this one. But here is a photograph, and so people want to accuse Ron. Oh, he planted the evidence, or how do you plant a gold wheel? And like his sons said that too, and they were down there. And again, it wasn't just him who saw this. Like the guy up in the boat, I think this was Alfred Lee. He was an artist, and he drew, and so anyways, he drew this what he saw from above, but 80 or 90 feet of water looking down in the Gulf there. So. The wheels, even if you want to discount the wheels, say, well, we can't really investigate it, so we don't know for sure what they are. Uh, you have everything else matching this site that we talked about as the Red Sea crossing, and versus other sites. So, the people have proposed, even on the Gulf of Aqaba, that the Straits of Tiran down here, the camera, the Straits of Tiran down here, no, that's Nueva up there, where Ron had, was investigating. But Larry Williams, Bob Cornuke, Steve Rudd, Steve Rudd. There's a number of people who say, this is the Red Sea crossing there. But as Dr. Glenn Fritz, he got his degree studying this, the Red Sea crossing, and he believes Nueva is the actual site, and Mount Sinai is in Arabia, and so he has a PhD now in this, and he wrote a book about it. And so some of these images are from his book, some of these graphics. But if you look at the underwater topography down at the other proposed Red Sea crossing, you have a couple locations where you have an underwater sea cliff, very steep terrain. And you're thinking, well, how did the Israelites walk that? And so they get creative. They try to say, well, maybe the gap was closed, 3,500 years ago. You're dealing with stuff that a lot of maybes, so then you just got to make up stuff. If it doesn't match your theory today, then you have to have a reason to make it work. But you don't have to do that with Nueva. Nueva is the top one. So that underwater terrain there, it's just very gentle going down. And so when God did that miracle, he ready. There's a verse in the Bible that talks about him preparing a path through the sea. This was ready prepared for them. Like God, from the beginning of creation, probably, he knew where they were going to cross. He had the terrain all set up there, ready for them to walk through there.
I want to go back to that wheel. Did you say the wheel was 6 feet in diameter?
No, there's he had found six spoke, four spoke, and eight spoke wheels at that site. This is a four spoke one. One of the earlier designs of the chariot wheels. Let me go back to the photo. Here we go. So you can see there are four. And even the drawing here, if I go to the drawing, you can clearly see there are the four spokes coming out of the hub, the central hub.
Okay.
I have
And
a
how many wheels were found?
do I have one of this? From when Ron was there, I think he had found that here's again some of the things people say they look seen down there. They're coral shaped, like the coral grew over shape, and whether they're actual chariot wheels or not, that's very hard to know. So if you don't count those, then he found one or two, definitely this one gold one, and then he found an eight spoke one, and I believe his son said they had located also a six spoke one. So Ron was talking about having at this one location all of these different spokes, which would pinpoint the date to the 18th dynasty, which is the 480 years before Solomon's reign that this event happened. So it matches what the Bible says in regards to the Bible chronology. Um,
I was just about to say that. Deep Believer Ministries have poured into millions worldwide. Powerful testimonies, deep revelations from the Lord, and messages that draw people closer to Jesus Christ. But now we've reached the point where we must grow. We've been blessed with a 1,400 square foot canvas, but right now it's just an empty room. No walls, no floors, nothing but potential, waiting for the Lord to breathe on it. With your help, this bare space becomes a beautiful studio, a space where Jesus is glorified, faith is strengthened, and souls are reached. And just like our first declaration from A Night with the King, your name will be beautifully displayed forever, a replica of the first one, reminding everyone who walks in that you helped build something eternal. You'll receive behind-the-scenes access, early viewings of our first studio recordings, special live stream access, a studio founder badge, personal thank yous from me, on-screen credits, and even a named part of the studio for larger givers. So if God tugs on your heart to be a part of this, simply click on the link that says Help Build Our Studio when you go to www.deepbeliever.com. Together, we will build a home for His glory. All right. So, and it's very interesting because
yeah.
when you go down to the Red Sea, they'll have poles, marking poles that shows when they've reached the other side. So, I mean, how does that fit or not fit?
Yes. So let's actually talk about that. Yeah, that's another key point. Um, it's one of the things where the evidence is now gone, but it was there even up to last year. So I think you're talking about Solomon's pillars. If you look that up, you'll see on Google Images. And sadly, I don't know why I don't have like a clear photograph of it in this presentation I edited. I have one picture of it right here. Ah, so if you look right behind me, it's a standing straight up. It's 22 feet or so, 21 feet tall. It's a granite pillar. And this used to stand on the Nueva Egyptian side. There was this pillar. Now, when Ron first saw this pillar, it was just laying in the surf on the beach. He didn't know what it was, but this is the time that the Israeli army controlled the area. So he just pointed it out to the soldiers. Hey, this is this artifact. There's not a whole bunch of these. So it's not like part of a building or something. There's just one pillar there. And he pointed it out. And so they later, when he was visiting multiple times, he discovered that the Israeli soldiers had stuck it up. They put it in cement. So now it's standing up. And so when I first saw it in 2000, it was standing there. It's been there all these years until last year, or until 2024, the year before. The locals discovered that someone in the middle of the night took it down. And we don't know where it's at now. It's missing. It was gone. Now there was no inscription. Now, how did Ron connect this pillar then to the Red Sea crossing? This lone pillar sitting there. Well, he wasn't paying attention to it. He pointed it out. They stuck it up in the cement, the soldiers. Well, it wasn't until he got to Saudi Arabia in 1984, and he was there, and he got in prison because he entered illegally without a visa. And a so-called friend told the Saudi embassy in the United States that this man is an Israeli spy. So almost got him and his sons when they were there. And so they were in prison for over 2 months. Yeah, it was a very bad situation. But to verify Ron's story, because he kept saying, no, we're not spies. We're investigating the Exodus route. And he was trying to tell them that Mount Sinai is in your country, which was a new thing, And so they, according to Ron, his story was that one of the during that time period of 60 days, one of the days they took him in a helicopter and flew him down the beach from where the prison was, up on the top end of the beach. There is Hackle, and from that location they flew him down. It's about a 20-minute drive today. So they flew him down, and he landed. You could see Wadi tears sticking. I mean, Nueva Beach, just this peninsula right there sticking out. So when you're in a helicopter, he could easily spot where the Exodus route happened. He said, "Land right here." He said, "This is where the Israelites came out of the water. The water split." And he said, "This is what happened." He said when he landed there, they noticed this was a deserted beach. There was no paved roads down there. Now that you can drive there, there's a paved road. But back then, it was just a remote area of the Gulf of Aqaba. And the Saudis and him, he said they saw this pillar sticking up, exactly like the one that was in Egypt until a couple of years, until 2024. He said, except this one was still standing up in the sand there on the Saudi side, and it had ancient Hebrew written on it. And so Ron said he memorized the letters and later had it translated when they finally released him. And he went, and he said the Saudis took a lot of photographs of it. Um, and he had it translated later. And he said it had a whole bunch of keywords. It mentioned Egypt, Pharaoh, the death of Pharaoh, something like that. And then it mentioned Moses, God's name, and it's mentioned the land of Edom. So it had the land of Egypt, Misr, and the land of Edom. And he said basically this showed in his mind, oh, it had Solomon's name too. So in Ron's mind, he's like, wow, here's the exact same pillar on the Saudi side, except this time it has the inscription. It mentions Solomon's name. And so for him, this was a memorial that Solomon's men, his navy would go up and down this Gulf when they would go to Africa and bring back gold. And, in the Old Testament, it talks about all these treasures and, wild animals, baboons and stuff that they brought back every 2 years to Israel. And the port was at the very end of the Gulf of Aqaba. And so one of those trips, Ron theorized that they, to mark the Red Sea crossing, they stuck up these pillars. Now, the inscription on the Egyptian side had been worn away, so there's nothing left, just the pillar. The Saudi side, because it's so remote out there, nobody touched it. And so he was just standing there. He believed that really helped the Saudis believe his story. And they got him, with the help of friends and such. He was released from prison, thankfully, him and his sons, and they were let go. Fast forward about 6 or 7 years later, this was 1984, this happened. So early 90s, he meets Jim and Penny Caldwell and this American family. They were living in Saudi Arabia. And when they learn about Ron's discoveries, he specifically asked them to go check this location out, thinking they could take pictures because it was still standing there in '84. When they get there, they find nothing. The Saudis had removed the pillar, and so it was gone. And so the only evidence left was, besides Ron's story, was this one on the Egyptian side that was still standing until a couple of years ago. Then when that one finally disappeared, um, so we've tried to locate it in Saudi Arabia. Once we got a visa, we were in there talking to locals. We've heard three stories of what happened to the Saudi pillar, which was the most important one because that one has the inscription still on it. According to the three stories, what happened to it. And the most interesting thing is people see it, like the old timers who are still alive. They remember a pillar there. And so here's the three stories we were told by the Bedouins out there. One, this was told to Dr. Kim, who was the physician, to the governor of Mecca. He's a Christian, a Korean Christian, and he has an amazing story too. And I know him, so maybe you could interview him. His story is more. He was out there doing the work. So after the Caldwells left, they were there 10 years working in the '90s. Dr. Kim moved to Saudi Arabia, and so from 2000 2010, he kind of took over the research when he found out about Mount Sinai being there, and so he could speak fluent Arabic, and he's still alive. And so he went out there and he interviewed the Bedouins on the beach, who lived in that area. And he said one kid told him, this was around 2000 or 2001, that this kid told him that they took the pillar and they dumped it in the water to get rid of the evidence. That was the first story. Another story, and this is what Ron told people when he was alive. He had asked around, and he had heard from the rumor mill, that the pillar was put on a truck bed, and they not shipped it, but carried it off to Hakel, where he was imprisoned, which is a border town in Saudi Arabia. And he said they stuck it into a government warehouse, and in somewhere in Hakel, this town there. That was what he was told.
That kind of makes more
So then when we
sense.
were there in 2017 or 18, I was there with a friend from America, and we were asking the same question. Do you guys know? And finally, one of the guys we talked to, he said, "I know an old man, and he's seen the pillar before." We're like, "Oh, really?" So we wanted to test him because we didn't people see YouTube videos, so they might see the one in Egypt and think that's make up a story. So we didn't tell him anything. We said, "Can you take us to the location of where this pillar used to stand?" The Saudi side. So he gets in. I remember we had rented a 4x4 SUV. My friend was driving the front seat. This older Saudi Bedouin is in the passenger side, and I'm in the back seat. And we drive, and he stops the vehicle and says, "Turn right here." And then he tells my friend, the driver, to go right to the spot where the Caldwells had found a marker marking the spot where the pillar used to stand. and now it's just broken up pieces of that marker. It was a cement marker with a medallion that's missing. It had a metal flag sticking up. A very small thing that it was like a survey marker. But he, without us telling him where Ron, the general area that Ron said it was, and where the Caldwells found this the survey marker, he took us right there. He said this, and he would not get out of the car. He kept looking up and down the road. He was very nervous, and he wouldn't get out. And he said, "This is the spot where he had saw it." And so we asked him, "Well, what happened to it? It's gone now." And he said, "Well, they buried it right here on the beach." So it's possible they just got, that's the easiest thing for them to do instead of putting it on it's if it's 20 feet tall, it's a granite pillar. That's, I don't know how many thousands of pounds that would be. But anyway, it'd be very difficult to kind of dump it in the water. If you want to try to get rid of it, you'd have to have a crane, a pretty big barge, get it away from the beach so people don't find it again, and then dump it out there. Same with the truck thing. It's possible they could put brought a crane out there and put it on the back of a truck and shipped it to Hackle. But just digging a hole and knocking it over would be the easiest thing to do. And this guy, it was the third story though, but that's what he said. He said they dumped it right there, covered it up. Then he, within a couple minutes, we were there asking these questions, and then he told us we have to go. He was very nervous, and so that was, that's what that's all we know about the pillar. But this is what you were asking earlier. These markers that marked the Red Sea crossing, and Ron really believed, based on what he saw on the Saudi ones, that this was set up by Solomon. Probably his men went out there and set it up, and they marked the spot of the crossing. And to me, that's it's amazing. Solomon was the wisest man who lived at that time. The biblical writers connected his reign to the Exodus because it said it was 480 years earlier was the Exodus. So there's this connection to the Red Sea crossing and the date of the Exodus with Solomon. And even Solomon's temple had two pillars standing out front. He had named them, remember? And so here we have two standing pillars at the Red Sea crossing. And I don't see anything against it that would this theory that these are from Solomon's reign. Some people say the Roman pillars, but the middle of nowhere, you find one pillar, like on the Egyptian side. There's no building there. There's no temple. You don't find like 10 pillars or 50 pillars. It's just a lone pillar that they had found in the surf there. So it suggests that it was set up by someone for more than a building project. So the only thing else we can think of is a memorial, and what for? You know, now you're looking at this being the Red Sea crossing and listening to Ron's story, then it makes more sense what they were for.
Andrew, I want to go back a little bit to what was found in the Red Sea, because I read somewhere that actually multiple places where they actually found bones along where the chariots wheels were as well.
Yeah, so yeah, I'm going to refer to this is the book that actually has that information in it. Now, sadly, the author of this book has passed away, but a couple of years ago he passed away. He's a Swedish scientist. His name is Leonard Muller, and they still run his website where you can order and download, buy the PDF version of his book. So it's called The Exodus Case, and this book, and I don't have pictures. I should scanned in a couple of photos of the pages, but in this book he does show bones that they had found out there. He took one out and had it analyzed in Sweden where he worked as a scientist. And then so the things that they had found out there, like they found animal hoof, they found different types of bones, so, skeletons, but pieces beside the chariot parts. And now the question will always go back though to like, okay, who like did a horse fall off of a boat? Did something like this get washed out into the water after it died? You just don't know. Since it's now mineralized and they found it underwater, you can't carbon date it. But they have found bones out there, yes. So what time frame? That's hard to know. But if this is the Red Sea crossing, then yes, the bones have been found there.
It makes a whole lot of
And
sense.
in this
Wow.
book, I would get that book if you want to see some of these photographs because he does have it in there.
And then, Andrew, you mentioned that from one side of the Red Sea to the other, you mentioned that it was 8 miles, 8 miles from one end to the other. So, how long would it have taken them? Because I'm sure they were running across trying to escape the Egyptians. So, how long would you say it would have taken the Israelites to cross the Red Sea?
Well, if you just take the Bible, not even looking at this site, let's just see what the Bible says. Um, it says in the morning watch. So in the Old Testament times, in the New Testament times, they're using Roman. So they time, whatever you want to call it, timekeeping, and so they're influenced by the Romans. But in the Old Testament, they had three watches of the night, and the morning watch was the dawn watch. Usually start around 3 or 4 a.m. It's when you start seeing the dawn, and that's when the rooster starts crowing. It says during the morning watch that God saw the Egyptians. They were in the middle of the Red Sea at that time, and He threw them in confusion, took off the chariot wheels. Then the water collapses down on them, and so by that time of that morning watch, between 3 a.m. until sunrise, the Israelites were already on the other side, you say the Saudi side, but they're on the other side of the Red Sea crossing. So if you then backtrack, that gives you an ending point. So let's say the minimum, let's say 3 or 4 a.m., they have to be already out of the sea. You go backwards. It was at basically the Bible, it doesn't say what like time of evening they start their journey, but it talks about that there's darkness on the side of the Egyptians. So that pillar of fire that was guiding them, in the biblical account, that pillar becomes a barrier. It goes up in the sky and it becomes a barrier between the armies of the Egyptians and the Israelites' encampment at the Red Sea crossing. So that stops the Egyptians from attacking the Israelites. And so it says in the Bible that on one side, the Egyptian side, it was darkness, and then on the Israelite side, it was a pillar of fire. Remember the Charlton Heston movie? There's this glow. It doesn't really have darkness, and it has basically the whole thing being a pillar of fire. But in the Bible, there's two sides of this pillar. The Egyptian side was complete darkness. The Israelite side, they get the pillar of fire, the light, and it shines the path. So that when the Red Sea opened, they could see the path going through. So that suggests that it was already nighttime when they started. So let's just say minimum they start at sunset. Like the sun's gone, now the pillar of fire is showing them where to go, and they that gives them the time from sunset all the way to 3 a.m., 4 a.m. in the morning to get across this. So if you do that, math, this area at that time of the year, I haven't looked it up, but let's assume it's like 6 in the evening. They can start in the evening time, and if you go to 3 or 4 in the morning, you have 9 or 10 hours. You have 6 to midnight, 6 hours there, and then you have another 3 or 4 hours. So yeah, so you can have 9 or 10 hours for them to walk across it before the sea collapses in on the chariots. So if you look at 8 miles or 9 miles, depending on how you angle that route across the Gulf of Aqaba, it's walkable. It's not like they had to run. So I'm not good at doing the math on top of my head, but we can look it up on doing calculations of how many miles per hour they had to walk. Or we can ask ChatGPT. You have this 8 or 9 miles, you have 10 hours. This is let's say it's a 1 mile an hour. That is slower than if you're walking normal pace. I believe the normal, according to Wikipedia, it's like 2 hour and like 2 miles an hour. I mean, it's just walking normally, not thinking about the Egyptians behind you. And so it's very doable in 10 hours to walk across something that's 8 or 9 miles. So yeah, it fits perfect.
Okay, now you have me thinking. Because like you said, according to the Bible, how long the Red Sea was left open, do you believe that the Israelites were already crossed over for a while, and then the Lord allowed the Red Sea to remain open so the whole Egyptian army would be in the middle of the Red Sea for it to crash down on them?
Yes, because if you look at the Song of Moses, what Miriam led them in chapter 15 of Exodus, it talks about like the army's gone, they're wiped out. Now, there's a debate whether Psalms in the book of Psalms whether Pharaoh survives or not. The movie he survives, he
He
stays back
did
and
end up on
watches
a
them.
rat on a rock. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, up on a rock looking down. Others have, said no. Everyone died, and if they find a mummy today that they say is the Pharaoh of the Exodus, then they recovered him somehow, like he washed up on the sea, the beach. At any rate, there was not a whole bunch of people, this like half the army waiting. No, this was a total destruction. Which, if you think about it, they are the superpower of the day, one of the main ones for that area with the Hittites and such. But their chariots and the army, political leaders like the pharaoh and maybe even priests and whoever else is with them, they are all it's a total wipeout, and that's going to affect them. Now they want to keep if your enemies find out that you lost your whole army and no one survives and you lost all your military equipment, that's a slow recovery. That's a problem. And so yes, I do believe that it stayed open. That's the only reason why they went this way. Moses, he knew the route. He fled 40 years earlier. Remember when he killed the Egyptian, they're going to arrest him. He flees Egypt, goes on that same route all the way across the Sinai Peninsula to Midian and meets Jethro, the priest of Midian, and so he knows the route to get to Mount Sinai. Here we saw the burning bush. He's walking that route, and then only the down here at the Nueva Beach or the Red Sea crossing because God told him to change direction. And God and why did God do that? Just for fun? No, it says in the first couple of verses of chapter 14. He says he wants to make an example out of Pharaoh. He said he's going to harden his heart, and Pharaoh will think you're easy prey, you're lost in the wilderness. So the whole purpose of this was to make a statement, and so and that statement was yeah, because your heart is hardened, you're still attacking God's people, you will be destroyed. And so it wasn't half the army gone, it wasn't just a couple of people. No, the whole army was in the middle of the Red Sea, and they were it. In fact, when they get to the other side, it was actually before they crossed. I'm trying to remember. This is off the top of my head, but God, Moses tells the people when they're complaining, he says, "The Egyptians you see today, you'll see no more." So it wasn't like there was half the army left, and then they go around the Gulf to go back and meet them on the other side. No, no, everyone that they saw there on that beach, they were no more. And so when the Israelites got the other side, they didn't have to worry about stragglers or part of the Egyptian army coming, over. Now, what's interesting, and I want to show you a slide here. The Egyptians, they went into Arabia. It wasn't like some foreign land. I mean, it was a foreign land, but it wasn't like they didn't know where to go. I'm trying to find my tab here for the keynote. So if you look at this map of the Sinai Peninsula, here we go. But I'm trying to find one that has the nice arrows we were looking at earlier. Yeah, I think it was not that one. Here we go. This one. Yeah, so this is yeah, there you go. I don't know if it shows up and move my head or there you go. Yeah. So this red, it's a really big red arrow, but from Egypt, which is right over here by my side, my shoulder, and then going across the Sinai Peninsula right there, you go across. This is the natural route. Well, they found along this route in a later dynasty, during the 19th dynasty, Ramses the Third's men had marked the route. That was the route that thousands of years people have used, even up to the Muslim period for the Hajj. And today too, you can drive it. It's a freeway now. You can just drive along it. So this route was marked though, the 19th dynasty, with cartouches, which is the name of the pharaoh in an oval. It's like a royal seal. His royal name. They found four of them, I believe. So they found one on this side of the Sinai Peninsula, close to Egypt. They found another one in Timnah area, which is right above the end of the Gulf of Aqaba in modern day Israel. And then they found just recently, about 2 years ago, I think, one in Jordan, out in the middle of Wadi Rum and this wilderness desert. And the one I saw, we went out and looked at it, was found in 2010 in Arabia, not too far from Mount Sinai. Maybe yeah, well, maybe a day's drive by car. But out in the desert, like the end of this route was marked. It was a random Bedouin, I believe, who had found it out there, and they then it was written up in a scholarly paper, and they talked about it. And so we talked to some locals, guides, and said, "Can you take us to this cartouche?" And it says Ramses the Third, the only one found in Saudi Arabia, and it was a day trip for us. Me and a Saudi friend who works in the Saudi government. He paid for the whole trip. He paid the guide, and we got in this guy's car. And we went out in the desert. He took a couple wrong turns, but it was way out in the middle of nowhere. And I made videos of it. It's on my YouTube channel. But we found the cartouche of Ramses III on a rock there, just the hieroglyphs. And that was the end. Now, this is the ancient trade route that Moses was, fleeing along, and the Israelites were supposed to go the whole time until God said, change direction. So if the Egyptian army was not all wiped out at the Red Sea, they could have easily gone around the Gulf and come down into Saudi Arabia, into Midian, because they've been there. This was the route that they knew. Um, What's also interesting about that, I just want to backtrack, right beside that cartouche, just right across the valley from it, a little walking distance, we rediscovered that it was, written about, and when they found it in 2010, the name of Midian. So it's the only name of Midian that is used for the name outside of the Bible. The only location, I should say, outside of the Bible is this ancient inscription on a rock there. And the Saudis discovered it and they wrote about it. And when we told our guide, he helped us find the cartouche again. But we asked him, "Do you know where this name is?" And he didn't know. And then the article in the journal that I had on my phone, in the middle of the desert, so you don't have internet out there. But I had downloaded a copy of this article, and it just says that it's across the way, and then no, nothing else, no GPS location. So I left them, and I went across the sand dune, and I'm just looking up and down this valley, and there's a lot of it, like different rock inscriptions or rock art. And I'm looking at, and finally we matched it up. So we did a bunch of drone shots and pictures. And the Saudi guy was so excited. My friend and the Bedouin guide we were with, he never saw that before, so he was happy. He was very happy too. But that said, it was written after the Exodus, but it said Midian on there. So again, it shows that Midian, where Jethro lived, where we believe Mount Sinai was, is in northwest Saudi Arabia.
I have a question for you because a lot of people ask this question, okay? They ask, how come it took 40 years for the Israelites to get to the promised land? Did they get lost? Because, it's said that if you were to walk around the world, it would take about 5 to 7 years if you could. So why did it take so long? Why did it take 40 years for the Israelites to get to where they had to get to?
Well, and that was their fault. God. So, if you look at the story of the Israelites in the Exodus, God was willing to take them right from Mount Sinai. Now, He didn't take them straight to the land, the promised land. Remember the way of the Philistines on the coast? He didn't take them there because He needed to take them to Mount Sinai so they could become a nation, make a covenant with God. He could give them the Ten Commandments and all the different regulations. They could build this, the tabernacle and set up, the religious economy. So they had that detour, but even from Mount Sinai, it was, according to Deuteronomy chapter 1, it was only a 10, I think it says 10 days, not 12. Anyways, it's a very short time, less than 2 weeks. If you were just to walk from Mount Sinai to basically the edge of the promised land, Kadesh Barnea, so southern land of Israel today. What happened? I'm trying to look for the slide when I was talking to you. This is a funny thing. It's a joke, but Moses is in the front there, and the Israelites, because they're lost for 40 years, and they're using their iPhone. And on Google Maps, if you get off the direction, it says recalculating. So behind Moses, you see all the Israelites saying recalculating, recalculating, and then Moses is telling them to be quiet, like cut it out. Oh, he says knock it off there. Yeah, so it's funny, but for them, the reason why God led them that way because they disobeyed Him at Kadesh Barnea. They didn't believe the reports of Caleb and Joshua. Remember, they sent the 12 spies to check out the land, and when they came back, 10 of them was like, "Oh no, they're giants and they're walled cities, and how can we? We're a small nation of people. How can we take on and inhabit the promised land?" And Joshua and Caleb, they were the positive report, but sadly, the whole Israelite encampment, they believed the 10 spies that had the negative report. And God said, "Oh, then you're not because of this disbelief. You don't believe and have faith that I can give you the promised land. This generation will die off. You're going to go back into the desert and wander for another 38 years. So total it was 40 years, but you're going to wander until you all pass away." And then a new generation, those under 20 years old, I believe it was, will be able to enter. And so it wasn't by God's choice. It wasn't because they got lost. No, God had to take them out there, and one generation had to die off. So it's a sad story, but they could have within from Mount Sinai, less than 2 weeks, been in the promised land.
SolomonFair.com is officially open. Our grand opening is here. Shop with purpose and support faith-based businesses that reflect your Christian values. Shoppers, this is your chance to discover incredible products and services from businesses rooted in faith, all while uplifting the Christian community. Business owners, don't miss this opportunity. Listing your business on SolomonFair.com connects you with believers eager to support what you offer. Want to stand out? Secure a featured spot on our site during this grand opening. But hurry, spots are limited. Here's more. Like our page on social media, post about Solomon Fair, and use the hashtag Solomon Fair for a chance to win one of 3 open loop gift cards. $100, $50, or $25. Join the movement to shop faithfully and grow the Christian economy. Whether you're a shopper or a business owner, SolomonFair.com is the place where faith and community come together. Visit SolomonFair.com today. SolomonFair.com.
So, Andrew, there have been multiple guesses for where the real Mount Sinai really is. And you believe that it was actually found, and Ron Wyatt was possibly the person to find it. Where is it, and what did they find there?
Yeah, so this has been, when I first heard of Ron and he came out to my church twice, we invited him in 95 and 1996. By then, he had VHS tape, whatever you want to call it, video of actually, I don't know if he did at that time. Yeah, I think he showed, yes, if I remember correctly, because by then he had met Jim and Penny Caldwell, and they went out there on their own and videoed all these sites. Remember, Ron was out there twice, 84 and 85. Both times the Saudis took all his evidence. So, he had pictures and film. Who knows what happened to that? That'd be nice if they put it in some archive and we could, nowadays everything's more open. We could ask them, they could release it. But at any rate, let's just say it's gone. And so when the Caldwells came back with all this video evidence of the sites, finally Ron could show people what he was talking about. Because he was saying, "Hey, I found Mount Sinai in Arabia. There's this mountain." So what did he find there? So in 84, when him and his sons went out there, they were just there very briefly. They noticed that there was a missile, like there's a military base being constructed up in the mountains nearby. So their driver, they just, they were hitchhiking basically through the desert. And the driver who had taken them out to this remote mountain, he didn't want to stay too long. But Ron saw the big valley, this big plain in front where the Israelites would have encamped. And I'll show you some photographs of that. Like here's this one right here. I think this is the this one, and then this one here. You can see how like this is the mountain. This is our vehicle way over. Oh yeah, I need to. Man.
That's okay. I'll just put the slide up.
There we go. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Otherwise, I'm looking like crazy here. This is the plain. It's huge. It's thousands and thousands of acres. A lot much more space than the traditional site. In front of this mountain and around it. And so that's what Ron noticed on that first trip. The second trip, he was able, which happened in March of 85, he brought in a new friend of his who was helping him on the Noah's Ark project, David Fazold. And Fazold was able to use some treasure hunting equipment, and they were able to find the golden, what they call now the golden calf altar. This is this pile of rocks with different cow petroglyphs, rock art carved into the rocks, these cows. And the locals were even so scared they didn't want to be around this pile of rocks. They were telling them, the Bedouins, like, this is a cursed place. And Fazold's metal detecting type treasure hunting equipment, it was able to discover gold at the site. So here you had a local tradition that it's cursed. You have cow petroglyphs carved on the rocks, and you had evidence of gold. And it's at the base of this mountain, plus this huge plain. And then on that trip, they also documented this area that had, and again, I'm going to jump to a slide that looked like an altar. And that site, and this is the most interesting thing, when we were there in 2016, our first trip in April, we met a Bedouin whose father knew Ron Wyatt and Jim and Penny Caldwell from their trips. He was like the sheik of that area at the base of the mountain. His name was Ibrahim. And he now has a gas station at the base of Mount Sinai. So think of Saudi Arabia, of course, you have gas. And now Mount Sinai has a gas station with a convenience store and a little restaurant. And so it's amazing how we met this guy. But his father knew Ron. And he was the one on that second trip when Fazold and Ron Wyatt got there. They run into Ibrahim. And he's the only one living there at that time, during that time of year. Now there's a little village there. But back then, they had a bunch of tents, and they run into Ibrahim, and Ibrahim tells them in Arabic, Hina Jabal Musa. And what that means is, here is the mountain of Moses. This is 85. This is
What?
before YouTube. So like nowadays, you talk to Saudis, they know all about this. They can show you a YouTube video, someone put like mine or someone else's. But back then, how did this old man, he wasn't old back then, but how did this local Bedouin know that this was the mountain of Moses? And then I've met others on our different trips at the base, and they're much younger. When we met this other guy, it was in 2021. Him and his friends had started a little fire at the parking lot area at the base of Mount Sinai, and they had started a fire. It was really cold. It was December, and I went up to them. They invited us to get warm. And I was talking to them. I said, "Do you believe this is Mount Sinai right here?" And he said, "Yeah." And he said, "Our grandfathers, our family, this is passed down from generation. We knew that this was the mountain of Moses." And so here's a separate tradition, a local tradition, and nothing to do with Ron Wyatt. No, he rediscovers what the locals already knew. He was the first one to really promote it for Western side, but the locals already had this tradition that was a separate tradition outside of the tradition of the traditional place in Egypt, St. Catherine's Monastery. So here you have Saudi Bedouins living out here in the desert, and they just knew that this was Mount Sinai from all the knowledge being passed down. So that was a really key thing. You have a local tradition there. And you look at the biblical account, it says they camped at Mount Sinai 11 months. If you look at the time frames given, it's about 11 months they were there, and they set up the tabernacle. They received the Ten Commandments. If you look at the number of 600,000 men and their families and all that, and the sheep and the mixed multitude, all the other people that kind of coming along, gawking, rubbernecking at this whole event. So you had all these people. That's 1 to 2 million people if you do the math. Where are they going to camp? This one's perfect location. And this photo behind me is that. If I go to this one, this is the south side of the mountain right over there. And it's huge, especially the southern encampment. This is a big plain. Again, you can see that there are Bedouin buildings and people, putting up structure these days. Here's another photograph that we took. It was a drone or iPhone, but you just look. It's not desert. People say, "Well, how can they live there 11 months?" There is a lot of shrubbery. It's high desert. So at the base, this is like at the same elevation at Dove Bayzet, where I live in, near Noah's Ark. It was just 5,000 feet elevation. That's the elevation right here. And so in the summer months, it can get warm, of course, but it's not as hot as like you think of Saudi Arabia desert. This is more wilderness. So you have plant life, which means there's water, and this huge plain. And here's one more photograph showing this giant area. This is one of our drone photographs showing this massive plain to the east of this shot. So it's around the mountain, the south and the east side, huge plains. And then the other thing the Bible says, again, just like the Red Sea crossing, you're looking at the Bible story, and you're there on the ground saying, okay, does it have this? Does it have this? Like a test. And the other thing that they have at this site is there's only one big cave on the mountain. He said, well, why would Mount Sinai have a cave? Well, look at the story of Elijah. He actually flees to Horeb, it says in 1 Kings 19. And for him, he needed a place to, he's running from Jezebel, the wicked queen, and he finds a place to stay on the mountain in a cave. And there's one cave there, and it's an amazing view. It's quite a climb to get up there. But when you're looking out, you can see in the distance, this is the plain, the Israelites in camp. You're looking way out. So when I send you these slides, you can look at it closely and insert it in to get a really good view. But I hope you can see on the television. But I'm in the back of the cave here. My photographer took this picture. I forget. But you're looking straight out. Down here is the gas station that Ibrahim now runs, and little houses, the little village. But all the way out there is that big plain. And at the base down over in this section here, this is where you find the golden calf altar, we call it, because that's where the cow petroglyphs are, that the locals were saying was a cursed area. It's an amazing site. One of the I think because I like studying the Exodus, and it's very logical, like a puzzle. You try to put the pieces together. But for me, it was this means it's a special place to be on the mountain. The Bible gives this area three names. It calls it Mount Horeb or just Horeb. It calls it Mount Sinai, and the other name is Mountain of God, like God's mountain. It says Mountain of God. And so to be on God's mountain there's a peace. It's hard to explain. I'm not into much into like feelings and all that. I want to see the physical evidence. But when you're on this mountain, I've climbed it. I've been on it over 20 times, but after the summit, I've been there probably 10 times, 8 or 9 or 10 times at the top. And sometimes even just by myself. I camped overnight on the very tallest peak, and you just it's amazing. Of course, the view is amazing, but then to realize what happened there, that God's presence was on the very top, and He audibly, He verbally gave the law, and it just shook the earth and made the Israelites want to run back to their tents and fall on the ground and say, "Moses, you speak to us. We can't hear the voice of God." It's I don't know. Yeah, I always tell people you have to go there to see it, whether you can climb to the top or not. It's a very special place, and it's not just us making this up. You have the Bedouins there before YouTube, before the internet, saying this is the mountain they call the Mountain of Moses, Jebel Musa, and so there's an ancient tradition there, and just like the Red Sea crossing, you have all of this geography around it matching what the Bible says. For the where they can encamp. There's a cave there. Um, Now, the Bible doesn't say that the Mount Sinai, the mountain has to have a plateau, a flat area, but the Bible says in Exodus chapter 24 that the 70 elders and Moses and Aaron and and Joshua, they climb up the mountain. And we don't know where they got to, but there's this plateau at the halfway point, and anyway, I've camped there, and it's very peaceful and beautiful too. There's water nearby, like coming out of the ground, and I don't know, it's just a special place. But this is the location I really believe, and others too, that it matches perfectly where they ate with God. No, they had a picnic basically. It says that they ate with God, and God didn't, them. And they saw his backside, and they saw at the bottom of his feet. It was amazing. You see the feet of God, but at the bottom of his feet, they saw this, sapphire blue stone. What a special occasion! This is all before the golden calf incident. But at that time, it was amazing. And then Moses is called higher up. So when you go on our hikes, when you go to the summit, we usually have lunch. We get to this location that you see here. So I have a better view, another drone shot. Here's this, you're halfway up the mountain. It's just a big plain, like a football field. Let me get another shot that might, and you're actually looking up here. Yeah, okay, there it is. Like it was almost like the burning bush, but there's all the shrubbery growing in this plateau, and you're halfway up, and this is where we eat our own lunch when we're doing the hike. And you have another couple hours climb, how slow you're going, or how fast, to the very summit right there. And so, and that's what in the story of the Exodus, Moses, he eats with God with the elders of Israel, and then God says, "Come on up," and he receives the Ten Commandments. And then they go back down. Even after all that, they decide to build a golden calf. It's just amazing to think that why would they do that? But here are more photos of this flat area. That's the main southern peak. So another thing I want to point out from the Bible, if you want to find Mount Sinai, you have to have a stream that comes out of it. Because it mentions that when Moses ground down the golden calf, the gold, he made it to a powder. It says he sprinkled it in the stream that came out of the mountain. So there's a couple places mentioning this stream, and there is today. They say based on not weather, but what do you call it? The temperature, the climate. That's the word I'm looking for. Based on the climate back then, 3,500 years ago, it was cooler temperatures and more wet environment. It was still, they were in the desert and they complained about lack of water. But today, when you look at this area, there's not a year-round stream that comes down like to the base. But when you hike up the stream bed, and it's just a rocky bed, there are pools of water coming out. If you get near to the top, you can actually see springs coming down, but they seep into the mountainside. They don't make it all the way down. But when there's a rainstorm, I've been there after a rainstorm, and there's actually running water coming all the way down the mountain in the stream bed, and so it fits perfectly. It's just amazing how much evidence is at this mountain. And I've been to a couple other Mount Sinai's. I've seen one, two, the traditional one, three, four. Passed by the fifth one. Yeah, so there's at least a dozen or so. Any mountain you can find in the Middle East, maybe someone says that's Mount Sinai, but all the evidence has to match up, and there's no one place that matches perfectly except for this one. And I always say, for me, this is called, and if you look on the map, it's called Jebel Makla. Now, Ron called it Jebel al-Lawz, which doesn't mean the Ten Commandment laws. Laws is Arabic for almonds. So there are almond trees growing on this mountain. There are fig trees. Here's wild figs we saw growing. Figs in the Bible, that was the symbol for Israel, the nation of Israel. I don't think I have the picture of the almonds on this slide presentation,
Looks so
but
good. Yummy.
a friend tried those, and wild ones don't taste the same. Those are wild figs. They're very bitter. But up the same stream bed where you find these, obviously where the water is, the trees will grow. But about 6,000 foot elevation and higher, you'll find the wild almonds. Now, why does that? Who cares about wild almonds? Well, guess what? Aaron's staff, remember when they had this disagreement on would be the leader for the priests and all that? His staff budded. What did it turn? What did it bud? Almonds. It had, overnight, it was a miracle. It had almond fruit, the nuts, and it had the flowers. So his staff was an almond branch, and so whether he got it from Mount Sinai or on his way through, what Aaron, and this is the staff that Moses used, I believe, according to the Bible. Maybe I got that wrong, but at any rate, Aaron's staff was an almond branch. And on top of that, if you look at the tabernacle that they built, at the base of Mount Sinai, the tabernacle in the holy place was one of the three main furnitures was the menorah, the candlestick. And guess what the candlestick symbols had on it? These 7 branches coming up. It was almond blossoms,
What?
it says in the book of Exodus. So the symbols of almonds was used in the tabernacle. The staff of Aaron was an almond branch. And you find wild almonds growing on this mountain. And the main peak, again, back to this Jebel al-Lawz name, that Ron, if you look on the internet, people say Mount Sinai is Jebel al-Lawz. That's actually a peak about 5 to 6 miles north. It is the Jebel al-Lawz mountains. Jebel means mountains, plural. And again, Lawz means in Arabic, almonds. And on Jebel al-Lawz, the mountain of almonds, the Caldwells actually went up to that. That's the highest peak in Northwest Arabia. They went to the top, and near the summit, they said there are groves and groves of wild almonds growing. That's why the Arabs call it Jebel, the mountain of almonds. But in the biblical account, you definitely have the almond symbol being used in the Exodus and the construction of the tabernacle. So it ties all in, and you find them on the actual mountain Jebel Makla, it's called, which there's different meanings of it, but one is Makla, meaning some say it means quarry because there's a marble quarry up there. Others say it means burnt or burning, and because the rocks at the top have that it's a basalt black volcanic rock. And I'll show you a picture if I'm talking about it. This is at the very summit, and this is actually what got Ron's attention there and others when they saw these blackened rocks. For them, this was like a key feature in the identifying the mountain because the other mountains around it. The black continues, but it's just like when you're seeing it, you just think of the fire of God. It gives you that emotion, the picture of God being there. I'm trying to find where there's so many slides here. Wow. I don't know what it is. Now I can't even find it. Well, here, I'll just use this one. You can see down at the bottom, see the color difference. So the base of the mountain is, you can even use this one too. Not as good, but that's the top there. This is a really good one. You can see the black. And then here's another one. And there's the black there. But this is the east side. And so this black, when you're there at the base looking up to the west at the base of the mountain, you see those blackened peaks. And you kind of see it here at the top here on the
Why are
monitor.
they black?
Well, it is basalt rock, which is a black volcanic rock. The question is, and this is where it is not, let me clarify. There are those who, I've been up there many times and I've gotten samples of this rock. Oh, here's my rocks. Here's proof I've been at the top. I'm standing here on the very top there. Looking, so over there, this is the plain of encampment where the Israelites would have encamped. Here's a picture of just looking at these peaks that are all black, the rocks there. And I even have a photo of the rock, a close-up of it. My photographer got this really nice sample. I have others. So you can see the outside edge. The whole thing is not black. The outside edge is black, and the inside is a lighter color. But let me just clarify something. This is not like in the past when not a lot of people have been up there. Now tourists can go, but in the past people assumed that this is burnt granite. The bottom of this mountain is this lighter color here, and the top is this color. So they said, oh, this is proof of God's fire. The granite burnt. Well, it's actually a different type of rock. This is granite, and this is basalt. And now basalt is typically a dark color based on the mineral content as volcanic rock. The question, though, is because when you pull apart the basalt, yes, it is lighter color basalt inside and darker on the outside. Now, rocks around the world, it does happen where it's called oxidation, desert varnish. It's this, you think of iron, you leave like an iron bar outside in the weather. Over many years, it starts rusting. So oxidation is this rusting effect where the sun and rain and weathering affects that. It depends on the minerals in the rocks. It'll make an outside coating that's darker color usually, or a different color. Sometimes you have the different color there than what we have here. But on these rocks, yes, the outside coating is dark. So the question is, when God's presence, because I believe this is Mount Sinai, when his presence was on the very top and it was a big fire, it says that the furnace, the smoke went to the very heavens. Was that fire like the burning bush where it didn't burn the bush? It was like a miracle that Moses sees the burning bush, but it's not a literal fire like the bush was consumed up and burnt away. No, it was just like a special effect, CGI. So the question is, was that the same thing here? You have the smoke and the thunder and the lightning, and there's this fiery presence of God. What physical changes did God's presence have on physical objects on our earth? So that's a question that we don't know. Here's one thing we'd like to test that hasn't been done yet. I was told it'd be very expensive, but it'd be nice to go around this whole mountain range. Look, you can see this black goes all the way around at the very top, but it also goes further to the west side to the bottom valleys. So basalt does on the east side, it looks like, oh, there's a layer at the top. On the west side, it goes all the way down. But the question is, do these rocks up here that has this oxidation coating, which is normal, this varnish, is there proof that there's maybe more coating on this versus rocks in another mountain farther away? Did God's presence speed up the oxidation, or was it? That's what I'm trying to get at, and we haven't tested that. So right now, the rocks are basalt, and yes, the inside is a different color basalt, but you can find rocks like that around the world, like for the varnishing. So we'd like to try that, do a test. Now, I do want to point out there's a misconception about the mountain that it's only black rock up there. And you can see actually in the distance, and I walked way out there onto this ridge, move my face over there. Right there, that's a vein of marble, white rock. And so it's not basalt. So there's, and then on top of it, there is actually a vein that goes through this black on either side. You can see on Google Earth, and I have other photographs and drone pictures showing it, but the vein of granite. So that light color rock over here, there's veins of it going through the black. So the top of the mountain is not 100% black rock. I've even found green rock up there. We found blue. There's some rocks with a thin coating of blue. This was found after I made the slideshow. This is one of my early slideshows. On my one of our Facebook pages, we do have pictures of this. It's there's a term for it in geology. They say it's the opal or something, but it's a very thin crystal blue. It's very beautiful. And there's one rock we found up there that has it, and it's like a flower design, like there's this pattern of petals all laid across this rock, and it's near the summit too. So it makes you think of the story of the 70 elders eating with God, and they see this blue pavement, which the Bible says was lapis lazuli or sapphire, this blue crystal at his feet. But yeah, so you find different colors of rocks on this mountain. The original story, more testing to be done. It's special. I always get samples of the rocks and bring it down and give it away because, God's presence was there. This is the real Mount Sinai. Whether it physically changed the rocks, we don't know.
That's actually kind of neat. So tell me, do the other Mount Sinai's have as much proof as this one? And are there any that has even a little bit though?
Yeah, so when you're at the traditional Mount Sinai, the St. Catherine's, they call it Jebel Musa, the Mountain of Moses too. And they have the monastery at the base. Uh, on It's interesting. They'll take you to what they say is the Golden Calf site, and I don't have a photo of it here, but it's basically a rock that's to me it looks like a sheep or a goat, but it's weathering. So it's a side like a cliff, and up there you'll see this outline of an animal, and they say that's the Golden Calf altar, and it's even a sign for the tourists. Right here, it's the Golden Calf altar, and you look up, you can see this animal shape that's weathering, has like look like an eye socket and a tail. Again, natural. And then when you get to the monastery, they'll take you. On these tours, you'll go inside the courtyard. It's highly protected. In the past, this was a remote area, and the Christian monks living there, they needed to be protected. So they have these huge walls, and it was very difficult to get inside. Like they had a basket in the past that lift you up and take you over the walls. Now there's a door at the bottom you can walk in. But when you get inside the courtyard, on one end of the courtyard, there's a well. They said this is where Moses met Jethro. Remember Zipporah? Remember the story when he fled Egypt? He ends up at the well in Midian in the movie with Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston. You the funny scene with the daughters of Jethro, and they're getting water for the sheep, and the Amalekites come and try to attack. And then Moses stands up and defends Jethro's daughters. It is biblically based that there was a well, but here at the traditional Mount Sinai, they put the well right there at the base of the mountain. And then right nearby, like 40, 50 feet away, maybe, is the burning bush. And it's just this bush that's still growing. They say it's very unique. And they claim that's the original burning bush. So I'm thinking, wow, everything's conveniently right in this little courtyard. And you think of the biblical account, Moses actually takes the sheep on this migration. No, not too far away, but it's this annual migration where they go up and down when it gets hotter, they go up in the mountains there's foliage and there's things they can eat there. And then when they go back down in the winter months, they can be in the valleys. And that's what Moses did with Jethro's sheep. So it wasn't like he met Jethro's daughter at a well, and then a couple of feet away is the burning bush. And so this is it's almost like a Disneyland type thing because you have all of this conveniently in one little spot.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you climb up the mountain, they do have a plateau. I've been on that. There's a flat area there, and they have a little shrine or building. They say, and I've never been inside of it, but they say behind it is the cave where Elijah ran to. And so yeah, and they have a smaller plain in front of that mountain. Not enough water there though. So a smaller plain, not enough water. Just very convenient what what they show the tourists. So the tradition only goes back to what's the earliest? Maybe 300 AD or so. I could be wrong on that, but it wasn't go all the way back to the time of the Exodus. And if you look at earlier traditions or earlier writings from classical authors or the historians around the time of Christ, like Josephus, you'll find out that, and I think the other one was Philo, or Philo, I don't know if I pronounced that right, but these ancient historians during the Second Temple period, they wrote that near where the land of Midian, and they call it the town of Midian, which is modern day Al-Bad in Saudi Arabia, they said near there was the mountain of God. And this is a much earlier, so this is 2,000 years old from today, this tradition that puts the mountain of God very close to Midian versus a much later tradition during Constantine's era and his mother finding all the holy sites, Helena finding everything. That tradition, 300 or 400 years later, is putting Mount Sinai in the Sinai Peninsula. And that's where if you go on a tour today to Egypt, if you're a Christian, you would probably end up at that site. And yet, a tradition that's much earlier, around the time of Christ, says Mount Sinai is in the land of Midian or close to it. So that's Northwest Arabia. The archaeology all puts Midian in Northwest Arabia and not in this traditional area today where St. Catherine's Monastery is. So that's just one mountain. Now, because there's so many problems with the traditional site, you do have scholars proposing all these other mountains, and some even accepts what Ron had discovered there. and believe in that, like Dr. Glenn Fritz, Dr. Leonard Muller, and others who say, okay, it's somewhere in Northwest Arabia. So, and I believe, like I tell people, this is the best candidate until you can show me another mountain that matches everything and is better in the evidence. Then Jebel Makla, Jebel Laz, this is the best candidate out there.
Andrew, all I have to say is if I do one of these tours, I would choose your tour because it's more biblically accurate. And let's talk about your tours because you actually have tours. Not only do you have tours for Noah's Ark, you have tours for the Red Sea. If anyone wants to come down to Egypt or Saudi Arabia, how would they join your tour?
Well, we have separate websites for the research and work for Noah's Ark and Mount Sinai and the Exodus. So for Mount Sinai and the Exodus, our website is discoveredsinai.com, discovered past tense, discoveredsinai.com. And on there, there's the sign up form, the tour dates, the itinerary, and then links to you want to see what it's like, go to our YouTube channel, which is Discovered Media, which has videos about Noah's Ark and Mount Sinai, the Exodus route. So you can see videos of all these places, our drone, exclusive drone videos. So you can get a taste of what it's like. We interview tourists who've been on our tour, giving their testimony. Yeah, so you can check out our Discovered Media on YouTube or discoveredsinai.com on the internet to sign up for the tour. So we usually do spring and fall. In January and late December, we don't have tours going on, but February, sometimes we do. But yeah, usually it's March and April we do tours, and then November, early December, sometimes October. And we also do private tours too. So if you have a church group, you're a pastor and just want to get all your members to go, or you're a family. This year, like in 2 weeks, I'll have a private German group. Thankfully, they speak English, and it's organized. There's a professor who's organizing it, and I'm the guide. He's the guide. And so it's a private tour, not listed on our website, but they're going to go the whole Exodus route for 2 weeks. They're going to do Egypt for a week, just like we do on our Egyptian Exodus tour. And then they do a week in Saudi Arabia, 5 days. And that includes the optional climbing the mountain. So if you want to be where Moses was in God's presence back then, his presence is never today, but if you want to be up there, you can do that on our tours. We have mountain guides. I'll take you to the top. So.
How moderate, easy, or hard is it to climb that mountain?
It's tough. I have this saying, even though I've been up there multiple times, when I'm going up with the tour group, I'm not a mountain climber, so I'm not. I'm in a round shape. I'm not in a fit shape, so I'm always at my desk sitting. So that's what I tell people. So when I'm climbing the mountain, I'm always saying, "Why am I doing this?" And then when I come down, I'm always saying, "Never again." And then I turn around and do it the next month. So yeah, it is tough. And we've had professional people on other tours. There's other companies going out there. And if you can't afford our tours and just want to go on your own, as an adventurer, we can yeah, I freely give the information. I'll tell you how to rent the cars, how to go, where to go, even hook you up with a local guide who can help you. So our goal is just to get the information out there. And if you want to do that mountain, it's going to be a tough climb. It's a day on our tour. It's a full day, like going up and down. You can go a lot faster and get it over with in half a day. But if you want to enjoy the climb and experience the mountain of Moses, then we're not going to just run up and down it.
And if anyone would like to reach you, Andrew, how can they do that?
Yeah, on discoveredsinai.com, we have a contact page. And so you just fill it out. And, my phone number is actually at the bottom of all the web pages too. It'll go to my Google Voice, but that goes to my phone. And so if I'm available, I can pick it up or leave a message and I'll get back to you guys because I'm always traveling. So yeah, you can email or I have WhatsApp. Yeah, different ways you can do it.
Now, how about your YouTube channel?
Discoveredmedia.com, not the com, Discovered Media. And so you can leave comments there. There's always debates. Like I wasted a whole bunch of time yesterday with somebody attacking the Noah's Ark site, and so it was trolling me. But I thought I better answer every question instead of deleting his comments. So yeah, you can leave positive comments if you think it's Mount Sinai or you want to contact me through there. But if you want to have a real conversation, it's better to do email or chatting or a phone call. But yeah, you can leave comments there and check out our videos. Discovered Media is the YouTube channel.
All
We're on
right.
Instagram, the same. Like if you want to, I have a personal Instagram under Andrew Mark Jones, And so I post, if you want to see what I'm eating that day, or what I'm doing in Switzerland or wherever. I don't always keep it like up to date for that day, but it's more of the non-research stuff. So if you enjoy seeing what we're doing behind the scenes or what we're doing, check out my personal Instagram, or I even have Facebook too. So,
Andrew, I want to thank you so much for being on because you covered two, well, not today, but you previously covered Noah's Ark. And then today you covered the Red Sea crossing, one of the two most major events of the Old Testament. I want to thank you so much for that. And on top of that, could you just pray for our guests watching right now? I love this episode.
yes, for sure. Let's bow our heads. Dear Heavenly Father, even though we're using technology here to communicate the gospel and talk about these biblical truths, we know that you personally can come into everyone's homes and into their hearts, and be with them. For those who are listening to this message, and to the the discovery of these biblical sites, we're asking that your presence is with them, and that you could guide them into this truth, and they can learn about the historical reliability of the Bible, that these are real events, that you are real. And so I ask that you bless those who are hearing this and watching this. And may it touch their hearts. We know you want everyone to be saved and no one to be lost. And that's the whole purpose of doing this, not to make money, not to go on an adventure, but to learn about you and have that personal relationship with you, because you're a God who cares, and you're watching over each one of us. And so bless those who are in earshot of this video or watching it, find it later online. May they find you and can be saved. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
Amen. Andrew Jones, I want to thank you so much for being on Deep Believer.
Thanks for having me back. I really appreciate what you guys are doing, and sharing this type, your messages. And so, yeah, if we have something new to share, we'll let you know, and we can be back on.
If you'd like to be born again and give your life to Jesus Christ today, pray this prayer with me. Dear Jesus, I admit that I'm a sinner and am lost without you. I'm convinced that you're my only saving grace and my only hope. No longer do I want to do life without you. I believe that you came to earth to die on the cross for my sins, rose from the dead 3 days later, and are coming back for me one day soon. Please come into my heart and be my Lord, Savior, and friend. In Jesus' name, Amen. If you've prayed that prayer, get yourself a Bible and read it daily, and ask God to interpret every word for you. Then surround yourself with like-minded believers in Jesus Christ. Congratulations and welcome to the family.